We all know who Red John ended up being after the reveal, but many fans weren't satisfied with that decision. We had a ton of candidates for Red John, many suspects, and also fans had their theories on who would have been a better Red John. So today I'm ranking 8 characters based on who would have done that job better, going from the worst theory to the best one. I have to start here because this is the theory that people on TikTok will not let go of, and I want to explain properly why I think it's the worst idea in the entire fandom. The idea is that Teresa was Red John the whole time, and I understand the appeal because the argument is built on access. She's the only person besides Jane who knows all 7 names at the end of Season 5. She orders the team to track the phones of every single suspect in the Season 6 premiere, which means she has live surveillance on the men Jane is hunting while Jane has almost none. She's alone at the scene where Partridge dies, and she's the one person Red John ever attacked and left breathing. On top of that, she covered for Sam Bosco after he killed a suspect instead of arresting him, so the show has already demonstrated she'll bury a murder when she decides the man deserved it. That's the case, and it sounds okayish until you look deeper. Red John's power comes from being the one thing Jane cannot read, and Teresa is the person he reads most easily and most affectionately in the entire series. Bruno Heller was calling Red John a he in interviews for years. Rosaline described a man with rough, strong hands, and the Elliston murders happened in 1988 while Teresa was a kid in Chicago raising her brothers after her mother died. There's also a writing problem underneath the plot problem because it just makes literally 0 sense for her to be the killer. Every moment she covered for him, every time she pulled him back from the edge, becomes meaningless. However, let's move on to the real deal. Haffner is the suspect people quietly forget, and I think that's the exact problem with him. Look at the profile on paper, and he's almost too clean. He was formerly in organized crime, specializing in wiretaps and creative surveillance, which is a career built entirely on watching people who don't know they're being watched. He walks away from the bureau to run his own firm, which gives him money and freedom with nobody signing off on where he goes. He's been in Visualize since he was a teenager, back when he describes himself as maladjusted and distressed, and Visualize is the church that produced Red John in the first place. Teresa asks him straight out whether he was at Elliston in 1988, and he doesn't answer her. He whistles beautifully, and Sophie Miller flagged that the man calling himself Jay Roth was an excellent whistler. He has a phobia, and so did Jay Roth. Every box gets ticked. So why does he still feel wrong to me? Because a Red John reveal only lands if it recontextualizes the hero's relationship with that person, and Haffner's entire history with Jane is workplace resentment over a book Jane planted to make him look stupid. Red John spent 6 seasons enjoying Jane like the relationship was the point of the killing. Haffner wanted his authority back and a working day without being embarrassed, which makes him a rival rather than a mirror. The other thing that makes no sense to me is that Haffner passes the tattoo test in Fire and Brimstone, so he wasn't even in the Blake Association. However, the next guy does have some traits that make him a decent candidate. Here's my honest opinion on Kirkland. He was never designed to be Red John, but I'd say his role was to make you stop suspecting the right people, and he's the most effective decoy in the show. Everything about his construction is deliberate. Homeland Security has no business on a serial killer case, so his presence is unexplained by design. If the show was written differently, I think he could have a good shot at being the killer. He tortures Heibach, he kills Lennon with an empty syringe, and then he stands in a room studying a perfect copy of Jane's own suspect board. That's a man behaving like a killer while chasing one, and that's the interesting part, because Kirkland's engine is grief over his twin brother, which is the identical engine driving Jane. If the writers had committed, Kirkland as Red John would have made the theme explicit, that the hunt turns you into the thing you're hunting, and Jane would have been staring at his own future. The reason I still have him this low is that his motive is grief, and grief points the wrong direction for this character. Red John kills because his ego demands an audience, and Kirkland kills because he lost his brother, which makes him sympathetic in a way the real answer can never be. The show also spent his death making the Blake Association feel genuinely dangerous, and 6 bullets in the back from Reed Smith was probably the better use of him. But let's move on to the better candidates that actually make sense. Stiles is the one that would be cool to see, and the fans agree with me because they're calling him one of the best antagonists ever written for the show. Here's the argument for him. Every other suspect on this list loses conversations with Jane, and Stiles wins them. He tells Jane to his face that he knows far more than Jane or Red John could ever imagine, and the terrifying thing is, he's probably telling the truth, because he hands over the address where Red John was holding Christina Fry. That means he has access to Red John's private operations, and a man with that access is either an ally or the man himself. His body count is the invisible kind too. Who knows what his people have done for him? My only problem with him as the answer is that Red John's whole architecture depends on being unremarkable enough to stand next to a crime scene, and Stiles has an international church, a press profile, and a face everybody in California recognizes. What I'd actually have wanted is the version where Stiles is Red John's original teacher rather than Red John himself, because that keeps the menace and explains the visualized connection without asking us to believe a celebrity guru was slipping into houses at night. So the next guy is literally the opposite of Stiles. Partridge is the reveal many people actually wanted, and I think he's the strongest case for one specific reason. He was standing at the first Red John crime scene in the first episode, saying he was stoked to finally see a smiley face in the flesh, which means the payoff was seeded before the audience even knew there was a puzzle. That's how you make a twist. Everything after that supports it. He hates psychics, which matters enormously for a killer who slaughtered a family because a fake psychic mocked him on television. He quotes Moby Dick and Dickens the way Red John quotes Blake, so the literary obsession is already in the character. And the detail that convinced me years ago is his crime scene work, because he keeps getting it backwards, calling copycat scenes genuine and a genuine scene a copycat, which reads a lot more like sabotage than incompetence. However, by season 6, Red John runs a conspiracy of cops with tattoos and a password, and a forensic tech is the wrong shape for the man giving those orders. Red John's authority over cops and directors requires rank or terror, and Partridge has neither, which is why the writers could only ever use him as a hand. Still, if you told me in season 5 that the creepy forensic tech from the pilot had been standing over his own crime scenes for 6 years, I would probably believe you. But now let's talk about a theory that's literally unhinged. This is a theory that doesn't make much sense to me, but it could be a good premise for a different show, I guess. Basically, the theory is that Jane is the killer himself. Maybe he killed his own family. Thematically, it's the most devastating version of this show. Lorelai tells Jane he's just like Red John, and wonders why they weren't lifelong friends from the moment they shook hands. There are posts pushing 1,000 upvotes about the smiley face looking like Jane's smile. The extreme version would be that Jane never left the psychiatric facility and invented everyone around him, with the Mentalist as a pun on mental institution. I get the appeal because it would make the show a story about a man building an enemy, so he never has to sit with what he did. But, in my opinion, this would have been a disaster, because it turns 6 seasons of grief into a performance for an audience of 1. My actual opinion is that the theory exists because the real answer disappointed people, and a disappointed audience will always reach for the most extreme rewrite available. But the next man needed no theorizing from anybody, because the show did the work for him already. Bertram is where I get kinda annoyed, because the show did the work and then refused to cash it. Think about how much setup he carries. He recites Blake's Cradle song in Red Queen the moment Hightower gets framed, then waves it off as an old poem he likes. And Blake is the spine of Red John's entire identity, from the name of his organization to the password. He's an excellent whistler, and Sophie Miller's notes specifically flag Jay Roth as an excellent whistler, which is a clue the writers planted twice. He's the director of the Bureau, so he can point an investigation wherever he wants, and he does exactly that when Homeland gets handed the Lorelai case. Even his name is a hint, because the psychologist Bertram Fourier gave us the Fourier effect, which is the cold reading principle this entire show runs on. When Jane names him at that press conference, it feels earned in a way McAllister never does, and half the fans still says he was the obvious answer that got swapped late. Then the chapel scene reveals him to be a humble foot soldier. Honestly, I think he would be a great Red John, but even though he isn't, he's still an amazing red herring. But this leaves us with the one answer that I and many fans think would be the perfect ending to the Red John saga.
I have many names. Some people call me Red John.
Bradley Whitford delivers that line in a food court with a revolver folded inside a newspaper, and for an entire summer, the whole audience believed it, which is more than the actual reveal ever managed. That reaction is the argument. Carter works because he's completely ordinary, and Red John's most frightening quality was always that he could be the man beside you in a queue. He also does the one thing McAllister never does, which is get inside Jane's head in real time, telling him he wants to release him from this curse, and then describing what his wife and daughter smelled like until Jane shoots him in front of 100 witnesses and sits down with his tea. Ending the arc there would have been brave, because the back half of the series becomes a man discovering that revenge solved nothing and that he has to live inside the version of himself that pulled the trigger. That question is far more interesting than which suspect had a tattoo. Instead, Rosalind touches his face in the morgue and confirms he was another proxy. He was a tool, and Jane warned us that Red John doesn't have partners, only instruments he throws away. The cruelty of it is that the show proved with Carter that it knew exactly how to write a Red John, calm and ordinary and completely certain, and then spent 3 more seasons looking for a version that could never be that good again. McAllister works fine as a psychopath and fails completely as a payoff because a reveal only earns its ending when you can rewind and feel every clue you walked past. Carter, Bertram, and Partridge all gave the writers that, and all 3 got left on the table. Tell me in the comments which one you'd have picked, and subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this one. I'll catch you guys in the next one.